You know, it must be odd for people who are out in the world that are sitting there pumping gas, paying a lot of money for it, to think that any oil wealth would be anything but a benefit for countries. So how is it that mineral wealth, particularly oil wealth, affects the development of nations?
It's a good question. Certainly somebody benefits when a country finds and produces lots of oil wealth, but it's not necessarily the people. Often it's the government that benefits and the people who are in charge of the government. You find that around the world, maybe 36 or so developing countries have a lot of oil wealth and produce substantial amounts. And those tend to be the countries that are the least democratic, partly because their governments, and whoever's in charge of those governments, benefit so greatly from the country's oil wealth that they can keep themselves in power, even if people start to grow discontented.
So one of the things out of your book that made me really think about our situation here in the United States, and then going back to the developed countries, is the fact that oil revenues give these countries so much money that in some ways it takes away the political participation and economic participation of these citizens. And you talk about taxes and how taxes are actually pretty important for how I guess political systems can be developed. Could you expand on that?
Sure. You know, just as people are shaped by what they eat, governments are shaped by the kinds of revenues that they collect. It's their food. It's what shapes their character. Now, we don't notice this that much because most governments depend on the same kind of revenue. They collect taxes from their people. And everywhere around the world, people hate paying taxes. There's nothing surprising about that. But what is surprising, and what we learn when we look at governments that don't have to collect taxes, is that when people pay taxes, they demand in return accountability from their government. They demand that the government spends the money in ways that benefit them, and they watch the government much more closely. Governments, on the other hand, that have the luxury of funding themselves through oil revenues or other kinds of mineral revenues, sometimes even foreign aid, they don't have to pay the same kind of attention to the people, and people are more likely to kind of give the government a pass. They don't look so closely at what happens, and they often don't demand the same kind of accountability. So, ironically, taxation tends to lead to representation. There's a close link between paying taxes and making your government more accountable. This is a key reason why governments that rely on oil to fund themselves are a whole lot less accountable than others.